The title of today's presentation is The Gun Violence Prevention Landscape, and it will provide a broad look at gun violence prevention efforts nationwide, the political landscape around these issues, and you can imagine how fraught that is, a look at what's happening here in our Garden State of New Jersey, and how you can contribute to gun safety conversation. Now for the formal part of my introduction. Our speaker is Larisa Mendez Downes, and she has been a Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America volunteer since 2015 and was a co-founder of the Bergen County local group in 2017. She's since worked as a state elections lead for the New Jersey chapter and continues to represent moms throughout Bergen and New Jersey. In her non-mom's life, she works for Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan New Jersey and is involved in politics in Fair Lawn, which is a very fraught place. I know about Fair Lawn politics, where she resides with 2 young children, a husband, and 2 energetic but lovable pit mixes. Now, on a personal note, I have gotten to work with Larisa for a number of years on gun violence prevention efforts, and I have to tell you, she is tireless, she is dedicated, and it is a joy to have her with us. Larisa, please come up and go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, let me take this off. Okay, I want to make sure that the technology is working. Everybody can see, everybody can hear me? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I was delighted to see that Dwight was going to be the presider this morning and to see Ed and Dennis on the Zoom. We have, as Dwight mentioned, worked together for a number of years on any number of gun violence prevention measures, as well as Dennis and Ed. So it's a particular delight to be here. So thank you for the introduction, Dwight. So I'm Larisa Mendez Downes, as Dwight said, and I have been a Moms Demand Action volunteer for a number of years in Bergen County. At one point I was the elections lead, and now I'm just a regular run-of-the-mill volunteer, but our volunteers are all over the country in all 50 states. We have chapters in all 50 states. And I am here to tell you a little bit about the gun violence prevention landscape. So what's happening now? I think it's probably more apt to ask what is not happening now. It's been such a crazy 18 months, if not 4+ years over the last, maybe even more. So it's kind of hard to keep up, not only with everything, but with the gun violence landscape in general. The news, unfortunately, has been less than heartening in terms of gun violence. For the last year, due to COVID and the social upheaval that we saw in the country, firearms records sales went up through the roof. In fact, while that number has decreased in the last year or so, the total still surpassed the pre-pandemic levels. So it's been a little concerning. And according to New Jersey State Police, those trends are similar in New Jersey. So for example, in New Jersey, 442,214 handgun permit applications were filed in 2020. That's a 332% increase from 2019. And we know that because of the pandemic, domestic violence rates also went up during this time. And that is a lethal combination. And that's in a country already where women and domestic partners, mostly women in this case, are 21 times more likely to die by gun violence than in other peer nations. So those are incredibly concerning statistics. The other thing that we know is that states are pushing the boundaries on what they can legally get away with in terms of gun violence. I think, as some of you may probably know, SB 8, which dealt with abortion restrictions in Texas, passed on September 1st. Well, on September 1st in Texas, they also passed open carry laws without licensing. And so what does that mean? Well, licensing in Texas basically means that in order to carry a gun in public, whether it's openly or concealed, you had to have 6 hours of training, a written exam, and a shooting proficiency test. And what this means is that those licensing mandates were taken away on September 1st. You can now carry a gun in Texas without any of those things. On November 3rd, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, will hear New York State Rifle and Association, Inc. versus Cortlet. And that is another, not open carry, but a carry case, what they call in Texas constitutional carry, but it really just means open carry or concealed carry. In New York, that's a concealed carry. It was basically brought by two people who wanted to be able to carry their guns outside of their homes and outside of the shooting range because as a self-defense measure. But New York and New Jersey both have very strict laws on who can have concealed carry licenses. And so they didn't meet the proper cause that New York deems necessary in order for you to get that kind of permit. And so they have now taken it up under the NRA to the Supreme Court. And now that Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett are there, they think that they have a much better chance of getting that passed. And it's not looking great, but we can hope that hopefully they will stick to precedent. But there's no guarantee. So there's a lot of stuff happening. Oh, wrong way. There we go. Gun sense legislation has also stalled in the Senate. As we've seen, so much has stalled in the Senate. So universal background checks have stalled. The Charleston loophole, which mandates that if somebody hasn't passed a background check, it means that they can then have their gun regardless if the background check isn't complete. This would stop that and mandate that a background check be completed before a person gets their gun. This is what didn't happen in Charleston at the AME church where 9 people were killed. And that's why we call it the Charleston loophole. And even VAWA, that's a Violence Against Women Act, which has gotten bipartisan support in the past, didn't pass because this time, or hasn't even had a hearing, because this time it has boyfriend loophole copy in it. It has, and the boyfriend loophole basically means that, so the federal law is that if I'm in a marriage or I have a child with someone, I can ask that their guns be taken away if they're convicted for as an abuser. But if a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner is stalking me and there is no common law marriage, or there's no child, or there's no marriage on the books, then that person, I can't file for that person to get their guns taken away. And so because this language to close that boyfriend loophole was in VAWA this time, it has no support from the Republican Senate. So it hasn't passed for the first time in, I can't remember how many years, but for years, VAWA has gotten bipartisan support. The other thing that happened was that Biden's ATF nomination, David Chipman, was withdrawn by the White House because he is a gun sense champion. David Chipman worked for years for Giffords, but before that he worked 25 years for the ATF, and his expertise and was a threat to the NRA, and so the Senate Republicans wouldn't consider him because they know that his expertise in a better funded and better informed ATF would make a difference in illegal guns coming out of federally licensed gun sellers, and that it would actually make a difference to keep better records, because the way that records are kept now in the United States is all over the place. Each state has their own type of documentation, and even the ATF as a federal agency has been restricted in many ways. Even just their searches are much less up to date than even what we can do at our own offices, because they're purposely kept low tech. So that was really unfortunate. But let's talk about New Jersey and get a slightly better news landscape. We have the second strongest gun laws in the country. We are ranked 48th in terms of gun deaths. And we have taken initiatives throughout the years, particularly under Governor Murphy, who has passed over, I want to say it's 13 gun bills during his last 4 years. He has been a gun sense champion. Even before Phil Murphy, we were able to have a veto-proof passing of closing that boyfriend loophole here in New Jersey. So we were able to do that with a veto-proof majority over Christie. So state assembly and state senators make a difference when it comes to gun sense in New Jersey. And now the governor is actually set to pass or set to work on a third omnibus of gun laws. So I want to talk about what's happening now in terms of those. We have passed, like I said, about 13 or possibly more gun sense laws in New Jersey over the last 4 years. And Phil Murphy is hoping to pass these over the lame duck session after the election. So I want to talk a little bit about those. So first, ammunitions regulation and record keeping. The bill would strengthen NJ's regulations relating to ammunition. That means that we would be able to keep a sense of if there's any bulk purchases of ammo or firearms or other patterns that could lead to something like what happened in Las Vegas. We all remember that person bought all of those guns and ammunition legally, and then he was able to kill, I want to say 57 people that night at a concert. So that's the type of thing that would help us and enable law enforcement to also trace guns and where they came from in terms of crime. Safety training and purchase permit updates. This would put a 4-year duration on fire purchaser identification cards, known as FPICs. And these cards are required in order to purchase a gun or a shotgun in New Jersey. That's different from a handgun, which is just a regular, what we think of, like cowboy, whatever. But these are shooting rifles, or just, for example, AR-15s, which are not legal in New Jersey, but that's also considered a rifle. So they need to be renewed every 4 years. Now, in New Jersey, you need a handgun permit for every gun that you purchase. But for a rifle, up until now, you've been able to get an FPIC and then just buy rifles however you want. But this would ensure that FPIC holders would have to apply for a permit every 4 years. So this allows that perhaps from one point to another, this person, say, commits a crime that would have them not be able to get an FPIC, then at least that would be in the system. They wouldn't be able to purchase more guns. So that's the idea. And the other reason is why safe storage training. And I'm going to get a little bit into that a little bit later. But easy access to a firearm and suicide ideation are, again, a lethal combination. When children under the age of 18 die by gun suicide, it's likely because they found that gun at home. And so, and 80% of child firearm suicides involve a gun belonging to a parent or a relative. And so for somebody who is buying a gun, who is getting a permit, the idea is that they be trained on why it's so important to secure firearms in the home or in a car. I mean, we have tens of thousands of legally bought guns that are stolen from homes or vehicles every year in the United States. And those guns are now in criminal hands that can be used for any number of things, and therefore, yes, they were bought legally, but if somebody steals them from, the compartments in your car, your home, and they're a great find for somebody stealing from a home because they can be sold for a lot of money on the black market, then that's also a great reason to safely store a gun. Raising the age to purchase rifles and shotguns. This would raise the age that a person could buy a rifle or shotgun to 21. Again, in New Jersey, you can buy a handgun not until you're 21, but you can buy a rifle or get one before you're 21, because young people can, inherit or get, go hunting. You can still do that with parents and guardians. But so why raise the age? Well, this is particularly interesting because Moms Demand Action was founded along the same lines as MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And part of the reason that MAD pushed for the raising the limit from 18 to 21 to drink was because that they saw that the accident rates for drunk drivers between 18 and to 21 were huge, which makes sense, right? Because we all know teenagers, you're not making great decisions. And so that was a great reason. And the truth of the matter is that homicides at the 18 to 20 age range are actually higher than that of adults who are 21 and older. And so the reason to push that is to sort of just maybe hopefully get that period of time where those rates are higher and just reduce those deaths. Going back to the secure storage, encouraging secure storage, and I misspelled that there, I apologize. I used to be a proofreader in my previous life, and that just annoys me to no end, so I apologize. To safeguard children from rising incidents of firearm suicide. Again, I'm gonna talk a little bit about this later, but I've had the question asked, and I've asked it myself of police chiefs and legislators that we've worked with, how can you enforce secure storage in a person's home? And the reason is you can't sort of obviously go in and say, hey, I'm here to check that your guns are secured safely, but it gives law enforcement an extra tool. If you're called, for example, to a domestic violence incident, if you're called as part of a safety check, and you see that there's potentially a weapon that's not secured safely, that's not stored safely, this law then gives that person the tools to be able to enforce the secure storage. So you might then be able to prevent a tragedy if that gun were accessed later. So that's why that's there. But I will get back to secure storage in a little bit. Helping to investigate and prevent gun crimes by requiring micro-stamping technology. I'm just going to read that one because I'll tell you right now, technology and myself, in spite of having gotten this wonderful setup here with the help of everyone at the house, I am not such a great technology person. So I'm just going to read that right now because I still don't understand. But here's what it says. The use of micro-stamping is a technology that imprints a unique identifying code onto the shell casing of rounds fired from handguns. And it would help law enforcement officials identify firearms from those fired rounds. So it basically would help in the investigation of gun crimes. I hope no one asks me about that because I have no idea, but it's supposed to help. So we'll leave it at that. And if you have any questions, I can certainly send it to the people who would know the answers to that specifically. Prohibiting the possession of .50 caliber firearms. This would expand our definition of what we consider a destructive device. So for example, like I said, New Jersey already bans assault weapons. And of course, things like bombs and mines and rockets. Thank goodness, but it has to be put on paper because that's how we live. And certain types of hunting rifles, by that definition, are also considered, and in some cases, exempt from our laws. It depends. But .50 caliber weapons are especially lethal and capable of inflicting a lot more harm than smaller arms, and so that's why we want them to be regulated as well. So the permits for firearms obtained out of state. Under current law, you have to purchase, as I said, the FPICs. You have to have a permit without obtaining a permit to do so, so that we have records of that in New Jersey. But gun owners who are coming out of state and into New Jersey have the option of voluntarily obtaining a permit and registering their firearms. They do not have to by any means. And so this would, again, require them to do so. And again, it's one of those things where somebody, we get this question of somebody who's already, has a malintent, what would be incentivize them to have them come in and register? It doesn't, but what it does mean is that it gives law enforcement another tool, so that if somebody, God forbid, comes in and does this kind of crime, then we have a tool to be able to enforce and prosecute, and that's what that does. And the other thing, which is particularly close to my heart because I have 2 children who do these type of things, is reform the active shooter drills at school. Right now, this is very, how they're done depends very much on the school district, the chief of police in charge of this, coordinating with the school. And we do know of instances where staff and educators have experienced distress and lasting trauma. And so the idea is to reform these so that they are done much like we do fire drills or other type of events where, we tell the children where to go in case something happens. We don't actually set fires to schools in order to train our children for fire drills. I always say, I went to Marjory Stoneman Douglas and where the shooting happened in February 2018 that killed 17 people at that school. And when I went to school, I graduated in '96, we just did tornado drills or fire drills. We never had to do active shooter drills. Now, I also went to school, I realize now in retrospect, during the time that the assault weapons ban was in place in the United States from 1994 to 2004. But now my children, and I'm sure many children that or grandchildren, have to deal with this kind of active shooter drill, which is ridiculous. I had my daughter come in after kindergarten and tell me that she had liked I think they call it a stranger drill, an intruder drill. They don't call them active shooter drills, especially at that age for them, but that she got lollipops because her kindergarten teachers sat them all in their bathroom and had them be very, very quiet, and they could suck on a lollipop while she read them a story, so they had to be as quiet as possible. It just sends chills and honestly makes me nauseous. So again, I wish we didn't have to worry about this at all, but the fact of the matter is that we have 400 million guns in the United States, more guns than people, and so if we're going to have to be doing this, and I have a ton of other policy measures that we could do without having to put our kids through this, at least reforming active shooter drills is part of what we'd like to do. So I wanted to go back to that law that I had told you about safe storage, and I know Elaine had brought it up earlier while we were talking, and when she reached out, she wanted to talk about safe storage and the programs that Moms has on that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Moms has a program on safe storage. We don't bring policy into it. We don't bring legislation. It's not about any kind of moral judgment on whether you have or do not have a gun. It is literally about safe storage and keeping guns away from children or people who shouldn't have them. As I mentioned earlier, the combination of suicide and easy access to firearms can be especially lethal. Whereas we know that overdose suicide attempts come to fruition fatally, unfortunately, in less than 5% of cases, actually. When there is a firearm involved, it's at 85%. So there is very little chance that you will come out well out of a suicide attempt with a firearm. So when kids under 18 die by a gun suicide, that gun that they use is more likely found in a home, in the home of that child, and more than likely that gun was found was owned by a parent or a relative of the child. And in up to 80% of school shooting incidents, shooters obtain their guns from a home, a relative's home, or from friends. And so in that case, it's particularly important that these guns be safely secured. And safely secured and stored obviously doesn't mean in a sock drawer somewhere or somewhere that you think that a child can't reach it. But chances are that that child knows where it is. I think we all know kids often know a lot more than we give them credit for. They know where the Christmas or Hanukkah presents are. They know where their parents' secret stashes are, whether it's candy or an extra $1 or $2. They're gonna know where the gun is. And so making sure that it's securely stored and away from ammunition is particularly important. And so that's why I bring attention to those two bills regarding secure storage. And I want to bring it to a program that Mom has, which we do separately from this type of program because, again, we want to keep it distant from politics and legislation. And I've actually given the Be Smart presentation, which is what I'm talking about, to gun rifle clubs in New Jersey. And the reception was a good one because the idea is that if you have a gun, you want to be a responsible gun owner. And the majority of gun owners want to be responsible. And so this is the message that we try to get across, present it to PTAs, present it when we could all get together at libraries, we would just put it out for public consumption. And Be Smart is basically, the SMART is an acronym. The S is secure all guns in homes and vehicles. Like I mentioned, vehicles is a great way for people to steal guns if that's what they want to do. Model responsible behavior. So that is if you own a gun, that you're storing it securely. Ask about unsecured guns in other homes. And this one, again, because I have school-age children, I find particularly relevant. If my children are going to on a play date, I will say, hi, my kid doesn't have allergies, he's not allergic to cats or peanut butter, all the stuff you cover as a kid. Do you have a pool or not during the summer? Is it open? He can swim, blah, blah, blah. But then I also say, do you have guns in the house? And if they do, are they secured? I want to make sure that they know I'm not judging whether they do or not, but are they secured? And if they're not secured, then can we have the play date somewhere else? It's a personal choice, and I'd rather come off as, the crazy gun lady than have something, God forbid, happen to my kid or their kid. The other thing, and this is relevant for grandkids, nieces, nephews, just any child in your life, or perhaps a babysitting child. If a child is babysitting, this is a great question for the babysitter to also be secure, because you don't want to leave a 13 or 14-year-old child babysitting and then their charge gets access to a gun that their parents lay about. So that's also a great question to ask when you're helping your child get babysitting jobs. Recognizing the role of guns in suicide. As I mentioned earlier, ideation, suicide ideation and access to guns is a deadly combination potentially, and so just ensuring that if somebody in your home or in your life is having that kind of issue, then to recognizing what kind of role guns play. And then tell your peers about Be Smart is the final letter in that acronym. And that's just, again, to a group like yours, and we're really happy to present to anyone who wants to listen, because it's a great message to get out there and it's non-politicized at all. That's why I have this little QR code over here. and maybe we can post it online later after the presentation. But this is actually NJ State's Moms chapter does an education series, and we have stuff like Be Smart. We talk about red flag laws, just interesting stuff happening in the gun sense landscape. And this is the Be Smart program happening this Thursday, I believe, at 7 p.m., all virtual. So you can just sign up. You'll get the link if you do that, so we can post that. So Be Smart is something we can do in our everyday lives. Like I said, we just make sure that guns are securely stored and away from their ammunition, and that we spread that message. But what else can we do? Moms has what we call gun sense candidates, and these are candidates who we know will stand up for gun safety if elected into office. Some of you may know that the NRA has a yearly report card that they put out for candidates, and they are graded anywhere from A to F on whether they will support gun legislation and remove regulations and restrictions on guns. And so Moms Demand Action launched its own questionnaire in response to that. We don't do grades, but what we do is we send out a questionnaire that asks candidates whether they support common sense legislation, like universal background checks, like closing the boyfriend loophole. This goes across the country, so it's a very broad brush questionnaire. So, you know, I know that some people will ask, do you support banning assault rifles? I believe that's in there, I'm not sure. But regardless, it asks these broad brush questions and whether they will support common sense gun safety measures. And so when they answer in the affirmative that yes, they will, they get something called the gun sense distinction. And these are just like a little logo that they can put on their campaign page, or that tells you as a voter whether they do support gun sense measures. So that's a great way to know whether they will keep supporting safe communities and safe schools. So what it is you can go to gunsensevoter.org/candidates, and you'll see it has, you can pick your state, and then it'll tell you down to the council level and school board level. And that's new this year, which is fantastic. Up until last year, we did Assembly and State Senate was the highest office, and now it's council and school board. And as we know, school boards have gotten particularly contentious in the last several years, not the least of which, I mean, yes, there's mask and vaccine questions, but also because there are armed officers in many of our schools now. And Everytown's research and other organizations' research have found that that actually makes a situation a lot worse a lot of times, especially if there are black and brown students in the schools. And so it's definitely something that you want to take into consideration when you're casting a vote. So that's the Gun Sense Voter, and I definitely encourage you to check it out because it's very handy, actually. So that's it. That's my presentation to you and my favorite guy, David Rose. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. So let me stop sharing. Thank you for listening this morning, y'all. I appreciate it.
Oh, wonderful.
Let me take this.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
I think I am back on. Wonderful.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you so much, Larisa, for your talk. Wonderful job. Now, we do have some time for some questions.
I wonder if the gun safety issue task force has considered bracing insurance companies about, leaving a very dangerous quality go free in a home where if they don't secure their guns, their insurance is sky high. So whatever formula like that might work.
A great question, and honestly, something we've talked about, but it's not anything that moms or any of the other, perhaps Dwight or Dennis or Ed, know. But I've never seen it as a policy or potential legislation that's to take effect. I mean, we've certainly talked about it in the gun sense community, but I've yet to see any action happen on that.
So Diane, your question is devilish because Moms is hyper-focused on a certain number of issues, and they do an amazing job, particularly at the state level. They do an amazing job. But
sorry, could you move in? You're not on camera.
thank you very much. But when you move away from that focus into the realm of where should we go, that doesn't, frankly, none of the national GVP organizations, from my perspective, and I count Brady in that, I count Giffords in that, I count Moms, I count them all in that. They are hyper-focused and try to do an excellent job at what they try to do. But when you try to move beyond that, it gets very, very difficult. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a great answer, because it gets very crazy very quickly. And as we've seen, we even have comprehensive gun sense legislation at the Senate level, and that it keeps stalling and stalling. And so I think even involving the health care insurance companies or even the house insurance companies, the idea.
You mean we might have to hack the Senate? Is that what you're saying? And you might want to turn to hackthesenate.org to find out more information about how you hack the Senate.
I would love that.
Yeah, I'll always put in a plug for that.
Please.
Absolutely. Lucy has a question for us. Lucy, please come on up and take the mic.
Thank you, Dwight. Yes, you mentioned hoping that the active shooter drills in schools are reformed. And you cited the kindergarten teacher who gathered her children into a bathroom, gave them lollipops, and read them a story. So what things might she have done, and what are the ideas about reforming active shooter drills in schools?
Oh, yeah, no, I actually think that in terms of what she did, oh, I think this is okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of what she did, I think she did what she could. I mean, you know, that's very dependent on just trying to keep the kids quiet, which is what you're supposed to do. I've heard, you know, teachers who, I think the idea is that if there's people running around their schools and making shooting noises and just terrifying the children rather than saying there's an intruder and now we're going to hide, I don't think there's a good answer to that. The fact that we have to terrify our children with active shooter drills, I think, is the problem. And I'm not a child psychologist, and I don't know what the best case scenario within that awful scenario would be. But I think she probably did the right thing. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm afraid. I guess it's a long-winded version.
No, it's very nicely answered, Larisa. And as someone who works in mental health, your point is very well made. Move on screen, Dwight. Move on screen. See, I'm trying to battle the issue of if I get too close to Larisa, I know I'm going to set up the audio feedback issue. So you have to also consider how much damage you do across the whole population of children in school, particularly children in the elementary and middle school grades who are going to be easily damaged by these active shooter drills. And we see examples in the peer-reviewed literature and in the popular media over and over again. It makes it clear that you have to balance these challenging priorities, and where the proper balance point is, that's difficult to know.
Yeah.
I don't have the certain answer either. Susan, before I go to you, and I think Terry may have a question too, I want to check in with our Zoom audience because I don't want to leave them out. Rob, do we have questions from the Zoom audience?
Appreciate that, Dwight. Yes, we do. I'm going to take first the question that did come up in the chat window here from Diane and Sherry. The question is, under your Planned Parenthood hat, do you think that the RFA will be introduced at the lame duck session?
Oh, you know what? I'm going to not answer that because I cannot.
Okay.
I can give you a call offline or something, but I can't answer that. That I leave for the Action Fund people.
I want to point out how how polished Larisa is. Perfect. Well done. Please go ahead, Rob.
Great, then we'll take a question from Elaine and Dan. Elaine, maybe do you have a question, or Dan?
Dan.
Yeah, hi, this is Dan. So quick question. One of the effects of the dominance of the NRA in Congress has been that there are severe restrictions on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention being able to collect and analyze information on gun violence and what the most effective ways of preventing gun violence are. Is Moms Demand Action or any of the other groups working on issues of firearms doing anything at the federal level to end those restrictions so that from a public health point of view, we can have a better understanding of what the most effective ways would be of reducing gun violence? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Hyde Amendment, is it the Hyde Amendment?
Yeah, I think you're correct, yes.
Yeah. Has put Hyde is abortion?
Oh, is Hyde abortion?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the...
There was a rider put onto a bill well over a decade ago that basically banned research at the federal level. There has not been a complete overturn of that. There have been attempts to work around, and certainly at the state level, we have worked around it because we have at Rutgers the Center for Gun Violence Prevention. So states at the state level are doing the work that the federal government is not able to do.
Right. I think at the federal level, we were able to move something like $45 million for gun violence research, which is nothing. Like it's a drop in the bucket, but we have moved it a little bit, not a lot. But as Dwight said, at the state level, and at the organizational level, every town has a great research center. Gifford's Law was actually the Gun Violence Law Center before they merged together. The organizations really have dedicated a lot of research to this because at the federal level, it's been almost non-existent. And again, pushed by and I don't know who it was, but I'm sorry.
Elaine and Dan.
Oh, Elaine and Dan. At the federal level, it's been vastly restricted, again, by the NRA, because if we know how to prevent gun violence, then we might be decreasing the sales of guns. So that's why.
Thank you very much. Rob, do we have another question from the Zoom audience?
We do. We have one more question, and then we'll hand back to you. Pam Berglund, go ahead, Pam.
Hi, thank you very much for your great talks this morning. My question is very simple. How do you correlate, or do you correlate video game playing in kids and the gun violence?
That's a question we get often. There is actually no correlation between gun violence and video game violence. I think, for example, we've seen if you go to a place like Japan, where violent video games and anime are just very common, there's been maybe one shooting in the last couple of years in Japan. And the reason that happens is because Japan has much, much higher gun regulations than the United States. What makes the difference here is easy access to firearms. Certainly there are studies, and as a mental health professional, Dwight, you probably know better than I, but certainly there are studies that, you can watch video games and it's not great to be sitting in front of a console for hours and hours. But in terms of it leading to shootings, the correlation is, the answer is easy access to firearms. It's not video games or violent movies. I myself am a big fan of the Matrix movies, and there's so many guns in those movies. It actually makes me uncomfortable now as an adult, but I'm not out there, shooting people, so.
It is totally an issue of access and the violence, the culture of violence that we have. So Susan had her hand up first.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the active shooter drill. I work in schools, and I've worked in several different districts. And I think your comment that every district works with their own chief and they can make their own decisions on how they do it is accurate, because there was one district where we were pretty terrified sitting in the dark classroom, kind of hovering, because they were coming along and trying the door and knocking on the door aggressively. And the one I'm in now, okay, they don't even call it active shooter drill. They just say, here's a drill, and there's a certain beep or something, and we know whether it's the coyote outside or it's the active shooter telling you what to do. And there's no drama, and it's over quickly, and everybody is sitting quietly in a dark room, and it's okay. So I think your point of having mental health professionals talking at the state level and saying, this is how we would like to accomplish it, would be really great.
100%, 100%. Thank you for underscoring that. I think so much of the conversation neglects our mental health conversations. And as we've seen just in the past year or so, we have a generation now that's traumatized by COVID and traumatized by school shooting drills. And, again, I keep going back to it. I mean, I am with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, but I think of, my kids, the only reason I'm able to sleep at night when September kicks off is because we live in a state like New Jersey. That doesn't mean that we are protected entirely from shootings or any of those tragedies. And certainly many of our survivors at Moms Demand Action live with that daily, having lost sons or daughters or spouses to gun violence. But the fact that we have the second best gun laws in the country, and we are ranked as 48th in terms of our gun violence, means that it is much less likely that such horrible things will happen here. We're not proof against it, we're not foolproof against it, but laws make a difference. Our legislators make a difference, and we're desperate to pass these at the federal level because we know that restricted access to guns makes a difference in our culture and society.
Thank you very much. And Terry, did you have a question?
Oh.
So, and I have two questions in the audience, and then I have a few questions. Imagine that. So Terry, please go ahead.
If folks want to follow you online and support you by liking your stuff online, I suppose they should go to, I found a Twitter account, and you have a Facebook page. Is there any local pages or whatever we could follow?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you. So the Bergen local group does indeed have a page. Do I have business cards? I might. Either way, we're a private group. You can't find us by just searching because obviously it's such a contentious issue, and so we're not publicly listed, but I am happy to give you access to that. And you can also just follow, if you text join or ready to 64433, that sends a text to National, and National puts you in touch with us. So that's sort of one long way round of doing it. But certainly, if you even go to just momsdemandaction.org, that's one way to contact the organization. And we even have an app now. It's called the Demand app, Demand Action app. Either way, you can find us on any of those things. And then personally, yes, my handle is @Larisa27, and I have all the links to all the gun sets.
So we have another questioner in the audience, and I must apologize. I don't know your first name, but please come. Susan. Susan has a question. Please come on up and share your question, and please unmask.
Okay. Hi, Larisa. Hi, my question is, I did a heavy paper at NYU. It was regarding school violence. what are they doing to middle schools regarding school violence?
Is it particular to gun violence?
Are they
or?
setting up metal detectors, cops, all that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on the district. It depends on the state in a lot
How
of ways.
about in New Jersey?
Again, it depends.
Okay.
I know that some schools do have metal detectors. They don't seem to me to be the best use of school board money, because basically what you're doing is you're lining up a whole bunch of children outside of the school. And so if your point is to not have a school shooting, that kind of negates that. I know that SROs, especially after Parkland, were particularly popular, but again, studies have shown time and time again that having armed police officers in schools, while they do prevent some forms of violence, they do not reduce gun violence incidents yet. Also, it's more likely, like I said, that having school officers in schools will often lead to increased cases of racism against children. I mean, children as young as 8, 6 have been handcuffed in schools. So it creates a real issue that I don't think is the best way to deal with school violence. But yeah, it's part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions in the room besides my questions? Rob, are there any questions in our Zoom audience right now?
No, we've had some stories in the chat, but no questions.
Then I get to ask a few questions. 2 are at the state level, 1 is at the federal level. So the state level ones, as Larisa, you probably know, 80% of the gun violence in New Jersey is caused by iron pipeline guns. Those are guns being illegally brought into the state of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Do you know if MOMS is backing approaches to this problem that are different from the failed approaches that have already been tried?
That's a great question. I know that for years now, we have been trying to get a consensus of the states. Pennsylvania, where we get most of our crime guns from, for a long time was not part of this body of governors who was trying to deal with it. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, not Rhode Island, but that sort of mid-Atlantic region to try to combat that, because most of our guns come from Pennsylvania, or if not the South, so they come from Virginia, and we call it the Iron Pipeline because it's I-95 and it just sort of all comes through there. So no, we have been pushing for governors to join a coalition to work together to increase the regulation in each of those states to keep illegal guns from crossing the borders. But again, as you know, it's incredibly difficult. But a great point, most of our crime guns, not from New Jersey.
And along with that figure, 80% of those harmed by gun violence in the state of New Jersey are people of color.
Yes.
Do you know if MOMS gun violence prevention positions are taking an anti-racist position on this clearly racial problem?
Absolutely. So that has actually been a movement within MOMS, most especially for the last several years, to really work with the grassroots groups who are doing that work in urban centers that are most affected by gun violence. I mean, that is a tragedy, part of the tragedy of gun violence in the United States, that it disproportionately affects Black communities, brown communities. And so part of what MOMS wants to do is be an ally organization. And so we've been really trying to work to get funding for gun violence intervention programs, and gun violence intervention programs which actually have been funded now by the Murphy administration and looking to do more, basically tackle gun violence from a public health point of view. So going to the center of an outbreak, if you will, of gun violence, and to try to take care of it at that focal point rather than letting it spread. So for example, retaliation shootings, vengeance shootings, all of those things, approaching somebody who, if there's a shot victim in the hospital, going to that victim, talking to them, trying to get out on the streets, trying to really have the conversations from people in the community rather than from people coming outside the community going, this is what's best for you, without that experience, without that knowledge. And so having that approach, I think, has been really beneficial across the organization, and something that we're really trying to do, not only in New Jersey, but also across the country.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. Now, we know that doing the same thing repeatedly that doesn't work is a bad idea. We all know that one. We'll just say bad idea. We won't say the other word that comes to everyone's mind. It's been 30 years, and you pointed this out. It's been 30 years since the assault weapons ban, which has now lapsed. We have no federal assault weapons ban. 30 years with no meaningful federal legislation. Do you know if the moms movement has determined the point at which they'll say, we have the wrong approach at the federal level. What we've been doing does not work, and we have to do something very, very different. Have you heard anything like that?
Not really. I think mostly because when Moms was founded in 2012, after the Sandy Hook shooting, which we may all remember happened in Newtown, Connecticut, and it killed 20 children and 6 educators that day. The general atmosphere in the country was, if we don't do this now, when will we do it? And it didn't happen right at the federal level. And we remember President Obama crying at the loss, the devastating and brutal loss of life that day, and so much since. And so Moms has always focused since at the state level. Because at the federal level, we always say, where's the political will? We haven't gotten there yet. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. I wish I did, because then we could all head in that direction, I think. But that is partially why Moms has very much focused on the state level. And as I said, I think because in New Jersey, we've been able to strengthen our already strong gun laws. I honestly think I would move somewhere off country if we didn't have what we had in New Jersey. Because it's very scary to me to think about children in Florida, where I grew up, Texas, and just the lack of gun laws there. And so because there's so many different takes on what the Second Amendment means throughout the country, I think it's still an uphill battle. And sometimes I think, yay, maybe this will change it, and then you're brutally brought down again. So I don't have a good answer to that, I'm afraid.
And with that, we'll close out questioning. So thank you so much to our speaker, Larisa.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.